All right, moving on to lesson 10, we're going to be discussing communication. There's a lot of different opportunities for us to be able to communicate with others. What we want to do is look at one-way radios, two-way radios, and we actually want to take a look at interpersonal communication as well, so that we can get the information that we need from ourselves to others and the information that we need to receive from others to us. Now, the first radio that I want to talk about as far as communication use is a one-way radio. Now, this is just the typical radio station that you have in your vehicle. You might have a radio at your house or some variation of it. For those that are younger, this might be a foreign piece of equipment for you, but the way this works is that it has an antenna on it that receives AM and FM radio signals that are traveling through the air all over the place. It's rather easy to use. Now, the reason that I'm showing this one as far as survival and disaster readiness is because this one requires no external batteries. What I can do is I can utilize a crank system on this, and what this does is it cranks it up. Now, the beauty of this type of what's typically referred to as a disaster radio or survival radio, and this is a real basic form of it, is that crank it up and you can use it for a while, depending upon how long you crank it. The more you crank it, the longer you can use it. But the beauty of it is that with this antenna, for example, I can get NOAA weather stations, I can get AM and FM radio stations, and that way, at least in a survival situation, I can obtain news and stuff of that nature and not have to communicate with anyone at all, just listen to what is being broadcast. Now, the reason for the crank is because if you're like me, and a lot of people are, I have a tough time reminding myself I need to put batteries in my survival supplies and stuff of that nature. So with a radio like this, I don't have to. Matter of fact, I've never put batteries in this, and I never will. Whenever I need to use it, I just crank it up. I have the ability to use a light on it. And this particular unit, AM, FM, and NOAA. Again, there's others out there, I don't have one with me today, that you can plug in and utilize USB ports, crank up the battery itself to charge your phone. There's any number of different radios like this that are utilized and very effective in this means. Now, the next style radio that I want to talk about is your basic two-way radio, and obviously I've got several here that have different shapes and forms and functions and things that you can attach to them, antennas and microphones and all sorts of things. The main thing I want you to get out of understanding two-way radios is this is beautiful because I can transmit information out, and then I can also receive information from other people. That seems like a real simple thing and very obvious, but when cell phone towers are down and no cell phone technology is allowed, then this is going to be one of the best pieces of equipment that you could possibly have in your disaster kit. Here's some things you need to keep in mind as it is related to two-way radios if you're not used to utilizing them. First thing is that when you pick up a package, it's probably going to say that they go for 5 to 20 miles. That's not going to happen, especially in a place where there's any hills, there's buildings and stuff of that nature. They do not work really well, even coming out of a house. You may have to get outside and get your best line of sight that you possibly can. That is important because when you see that, hey, these radios can transmit up to 20 miles, then you think they can. I've never seen any other than ham radios that can do anything remotely close to that. So keep that in mind. It's going to be very dependent upon your location and how far they can transmit. If you're going to have these in your survival supplies, as I've already mentioned, make sure you have battery backups and store them right with the radio. And the reason I say that is because these are notorious for when you pull them out of your kit not being able to be utilized. So get the ones that have two things in them: rechargeable batteries so that you can keep them charged and ready to go at any time. That's what a system like this right here is for. You can keep the radio sitting directly down into the charging system, and they can stay right on a kitchen counter or wherever you want to keep your survival supplies. And then that way, when you pull them off and you're ready to go, they are ready to go. What I also like to do in my survival kit is have radios like this that not only have a rechargeable battery in them, but can also work on AA's or AAA's or whatever they might utilize. That way I have a backup system to being able to have battery and power to utilize them effectively. As far as safety is concerned and security, this one might be a little bit out there for you, but consider this. Anytime you use a radio, a two-way radio in this manner, it's very easy for other people to monitor your communication. Now, that's not a problem in a survival situation where you're wanting to bring attention to yourself. You may want to get saved, like you take a radio with you on a hiking trip. I'm a big fan, and I tell our students that a radio that is tuned to the same frequency as the local search and rescue team is an incredible piece of equipment if you need it. However, in an urban setting where you're broadcasting out to somebody, hey, we've got all kinds of supplies over here, then you bring unwarranted attention to yourself. And you need to be prepared to handle the security of that. Or if you do want to share supplies with other people, be prepared, because they're probably going to come and either try to get some of your supplies or take some of your supplies from you. So monitoring your radio communication is something you need to be aware of. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is ham radios. We've talked about them briefly, but I've got 2 or 3 here in pieces and parts just to show you that there's all kinds of things that make ham radios a superior radio choice. Here's the problem with that. To be able to operate legally a ham radio, you need to get a license to do that. It's very inexpensive. You have to study for a test. The test can be cumbersome, but it's well worth every amount of effort and time and money that you invest into getting your ham radio license. You know, I've mentioned before in one of the other lessons, but it's worthy of repeating. When the fires happened in the Pigeon Forge, Gatlinburg area a few years ago, it was incredible what ham radio operators were able to do to get first responders out to save people that were in the backcountry. Literally save their lives only because they had ham radios and could communicate in that particular situation. The way ham radios work is that, number one, they have more power. And so when you transmit and receive, you can get information from farther distances. They too have issue with hills and buildings and stuff of that nature, but because they have so much power, they're going to be able to go farther distances. For example, in a cityscape, it seems odd if you've never studied this, but you can actually bounce the signal off of one building and go completely on the other side and utilize basically that bounce of frequency off of buildings, sometimes even cliff lines in a natural area. Now, that takes some understanding, and that's one of the things that you study when you study for the test for a ham radio. So it's a really useful skill set to be able to have, and an incredibly piece of equipment. The reason I say that is because you can not only monitor your typical radio signals, but you also have frequencies that only ham radios can access. And so, for example, with a little training in the ability to know where certain antennas and repeaters are, you can push this signal out and go for hundreds of miles. Matter of fact, if you study really hard, you can take a signal from this little radio, if you know how to do it, and connect to the right repeater and push it all the way across the ocean and go to another country. Now, that takes a lot of effort. I'm not saying that that's something I can do. I cannot do that. But it is one of those things that I have talked to people over 20 miles away utilizing just a ham radio system, because I could connect to certain repeaters and antennas, and they were doing the same, and we could communicate. I briefly want to discuss social media as a means of communication. As I record this video, we are in the middle of the riots of the summer of 2020. And I want to tell you one way that you can utilize social media. There's several different ways you can use social media for messaging. Obviously, you can just send messages, you can monitor what your friends are doing, and you can see a snapshot of different areas. Now let's think about the particular app referred to as Snapchat. This is a fantastic resource that it's the last thing I need is another social media platform that I have to keep up with, but I have a Snapchat, and here's one of the benefits from it. Let's say, for example, that I want to look at a cityscape in Louisville, Kentucky. I'm here from Kentucky. We have riots that are going on in Louisville. And let's say that I want to look at a cross section of this street versus this street. I can go to Snapchat, look at the map of that area, and then it'll show the videos that are being taken of that particular location. And so I don't have to go there. I don't have to rely on news media to get information about that particular situation. I can literally, in almost real time, go to that location and see what's happening. So that is an incredibly valuable thing when it comes to disaster readiness. For example, in the middle of these riots, if I have to I have to fly for work. I have to go take care of some family because they live 10 states away, and I have to go to the airport. I can look at, for example, Snapchat, see what sort of activity is going on in that particular area, and that way it'll give me some intelligence, literally some open source intelligence to tell me what's going on and help me stay more safe. The last thing I want to refer to is an acronym called PACE, and it's utilized widely in disaster readiness, emergency, survival, and stuff of that nature. We're going to apply it to communications here today. What PACE represents is a way to understand the different levels of communication that you and your group, whether that group is people that you just simply care about, that you work with, or your family. It is a primary means of communication, an alternate, a contingency, and then an emergency. Okay, so the primary means of communication typically is a cell phone. You have a cell phone, that's what most people utilize to communicate effectively with those that they care about. You have an alternate. Oftentimes that will be even a computer or some of that nature that has social media on it, so you can go back and forth on that particular social media platform. Contingency is the type of communication where, hey, if I can't talk to you, and we have to do this all the time in survival and disaster readiness training, is set up a plan such that if I cannot communicate by our primary and our alternate means of communication, what do? We could be sending emails. We could have a message board where we put messages out and people can come to that message board when they have time. And then last but not least, we would be considering emergency. And that's where, in my opinion, something like a radio comes in perfect use, in that you don't necessarily talk on a radio. I don't know that I'm ever going to talk to my family on a radio just for the fun of it. However, having radios available and discussing that ahead of time is incredibly valuable and something all of us need to be doing. Again, PACE is primary, alternate, contingency, and emergency forms of communication. So this has been a look at radio communication, one-way, two-way, ham radio, social media, and a little bit as far as interpersonal skills. So with that said, we have a lot more information in the guide that goes along with this course. So we look forward to you picking that up as well, because there's a tremendous amount of information right there with that booklet. Come on, join in. Let's learn together.